Welcome everybody to the third in the Tree Ring series of webinars as part of this week's Urban Tree Festival. I'm Neil Sinden, I'm Director of CPRE London and a member of the Urban Tree Festival Steering Group. CPRE London's been curating this series of webinars, and if you haven't joined one before now, particular welcome to you. And do check out the rest of the programme if you're inspired by this one. There's plenty more happening during the course of the week that you might be interested in. But right, I think attendee numbers are stabilising, so I'm going to hand over to Nicole now, who will be running the session. Before doing so, just wanted to say we are recording this session, so you'll be able to look back at it on our YouTube channel in due course. And if you think other people might be interested in the content, point them in the direction of that link. The only other thing to say is, if you haven't, this is a volunteer-run festival largely, and if you haven't been able to donate to the Urban Tree Festival in signing up for this event, we'd be delighted if you felt moved to do so at some point in the future. That's all I'll say for now. So looking forward to this myself, and I'm going to hand over to Nicole.
There we go. Hello, thank you very much, Neil. So good afternoon and welcome to this Urban Tree Festival Tree Rings webinar. So as Neil said, I'm Nicole Collomb. I'm a Senior Policy Officer at the Greater London Authority in the Green Infrastructure team, and I'm going to be chairing this session. So this webinar is going to explore the London Urban Forest Plan, what it hopes to achieve and how it's being delivered on the ground. The plan was published in November 2020. I think there's a link in the chat to the document so that you can have a look at that, or it's just about, it's just gone in now. And it's been developed by a partnership of organisations across London who are, and beyond actually, who are involved in trees and woodlands across the city, and it's coordinated by the Forestry Commission and the Greater London Authority. So today we've got 4 fantastic speakers who are going to tell you more about the plan and some of the projects that are being delivered as part of the plan. If you've got any questions as the speakers are talking, please put them in the Q&A function rather than the chat. Ideally in the Q&A box, if you just click the Q&A box, you can write your question in. If you can say who the question's for, that's really helpful. And if you want to support a question that someone else has written, you can click the thumbs up button, and that'll then prioritise that question for when we're asking them to the panellists, and that'll help prioritise them. So hopefully we won't have any connection problems, but bear with us if we do. And so, yeah, without further ado, let's get on to the first speaker. So the first speaker is Richard Pearce from the Forestry Commission. He's going to give an overview of the London Urban Forest Plan, and we'll have some time for questions after he's finished speaking. So welcome, and over to you, Richard.
Lovely, thank you very much, Nicole. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to get this screen up and running and make sure it's working. Okay, hopefully, Nicole, just checking, can everyone see that screen?
Yes, that's great, Richard.
Brilliant, cool, good start.
And I can see you too.
Oh, no, okay, that's not so good. Okay, so thank you, everybody. My name is Richard. I'm the Partnerships Manager for London and Thames area for the Forestry Commission. I just want to say that the Forestry Commission, for those that aren't aware of it or had any engagement with it so far, is that we're the government's department responsible for promoting the protection, expanding and management of sustainable woodlands and forests and trees. In England, there are a couple of organisations connected with us, such as Forestry England, that manages the nation's forests, and Forest Research, who undertake a huge range of research connected with trees, forests, woodlands. And there's ourselves, the Forestry Commission. My role is engaging with partners, landowners and others to encourage more sustainable management. So today I'm going to be talking about the Urban Forest Plan, giving an overview, and as Nicole says, we've got a range of other speakers that are going to talk about specific bits, but I want to give the overview of that. And This plan has been created collaboratively by the Urban Forest Partnership. So a little bit about that. A little bit about actually urban forest. We talk about urban forest a lot, and just to sort of highlight what that is, and then dive into the plan as to what it is and what we're trying to achieve. So let's start with the Urban Forest Partnership. This is a collaboration, this document from the partnership, and it comprises organisations that have a strategic interest in the capital's trees and woodlands. So we have 25 or so at the moment, and continually growing organisations that are part of this. The objective of the partnership is to be working together to manage and promote and enhance the existing woodland, implement good practice, look about long-term resilience, increase the canopy cover in London, and understand the value of London's urban forests, improve data and sharing and dissemination of information, and increase engagement. So, and important as well, to ensure that decision makers support and value London's urban forest. So we're all trying to work together with those aims and objectives, and this plan has been produced from that. So what is the urban forest? It's a whole wide range of places, locations and scales. So there might be trees along roads and avenues and railway tracks and canals and rivers and everything else in London. It's also about the parks and nature reserves and green space that we have. We see them in our streets, our domestic gardens. Some people have trees within them. Hedges is part of the urban forest, as well as land on housing estates, schools, hospitals, public land. And then there's the larger urban woodlands that you may find about within the city, and also the green belt. And it's importantly, it's planted and naturally regenerating trees that is part of the urban forest. So in London, we've got around about 21% of London has tree canopy on it, which sounds great. However, there's a really huge range from around about 3% all the way up to over 50% of council wards has tree cover on it. And so the challenge is to how to find the locations to provide those additional spaces. Private gardens take a real important part, with sort of 20% is within the private gardens. And then the woodlands, huge importance for habitat and wildlife. 13% of our woodlands are SSSIs, 20% of the woodlands in London are ancient. So why are we doing this? Why are we all passionate about trees? And it's really important that it provides such a massive range of benefits. Now, in the DEFRA 25-year environmental plan, it evolves around these 6 sort of public goods that have been identified. And the great news is that trees contribute to all of those public goods. In London, we have around about 8.4 million trees. They're busy soaking in and storing carbon, cleaning our air, cooling us in the summer, helping us with flood reduction and climate change. And all this is happening to us. And it's so important that we look and appreciate them. It's not only looking at them as works of art and beauty, but also that the way they help us live our lives. And I think the pandemic is clearly demonstrating the importance of green space within our lives and our well-being. The emergence of bright leaves in spring, the shade in the summer, and the beautiful colours in the autumn are all parts of nature's way of helping us. And volunteering, for example, in tree planting, tree wardens, citizen science projects have enabled us to play a part in looking after these trees. So the benefits of air quality, for filtering fine particulate matter out, trees provide food and nuts for wildlife and humans, there's nectar for bees, they benefit a whole range of insects, birds and mammals. They help improve recovery time from illness and reduce stress and improve our mental health and well-being. And they're also an opportunity to produce sustainable wood products. Now, I could spend the whole talk talking about the benefits of trees, but we move on to the plan. But it's really important that we take a moment and just look at what we've got around us and appreciate them. So the Urban Forest Plan is a framework to guide the partnership to achieve the objectives of protecting, managing and expanding the capital's forest. So what's the purpose of the plan? So the plan is to provide clear vision and direction, identifying some of the key priority areas for the partnership to focus on and work on. There's already a range of policies out there, and this is about a delivery document, about identifying goals and actions that will make a difference. As already mentioned, there's already a huge collaborative affair with huge range of organisations and others trying to help to deliver this. Within the document, it identifies a whole range of issues and challenges, but also opportunities. And the document has been used already by a number of organisations as part of a funding bid for other projects and activities. And this document is designed to be available to anyone who can make a difference, whether that be decision makers, local communities, and everything in between. It's a document that hopefully people can understand and pick into and help them with their direction. So the structure of the plan is that it covers three main areas of interest. So the three themes are protecting and managing. So that's about looking after what we already have, the wonderful woods and trees we have already in London. Growing and expanding is looking at the opportunities to expand the canopy cover and to develop all those benefits that we've just mentioned. And the third theme is promoting and supporting. It needs our support. Trees, as I say, are part of our everyday lives, but sometimes they aren't seen. We walk past them every day with not too much thought. The ambition is to raise awareness from policymakers to homeowners. So within the plan, there are 12 goals. Each of the goals has a range of actions, sort of 2 to 5 typically, and all those actions have an organisation that's leading on them. One of the really positive things about this management plan is that organisations have come together and identified and said, these are the things that we can help with, and that's made the plan real. And so I thank all of those organisations that are coming together to do this. So if we look at the protecting and managing first of all, there are 4 goals within the protecting and managing section. So goal 1 is really focusing on the threats from pest disease, climate change. It's looking at actions include developing a set of principles for managing the urban forest, to include increased resilience, which includes biodiversity, biosecurity, and also species choice considerations. Goal 2 starts looking about managing our existing woodland, and it's essential that we manage our existing woodlands. And we'd like the actions there about identifying where woodlands require management and providing support in terms of training and sharing good practice to enable that to happen, to deliver those benefits for people and wildlife. Goal 3 is about strategic frameworks. It's to ensure an integrated approach, having an urban forest plan at a local level that identifies where people are going and identifies resource and how we can support that. And the actions in this goal are about supporting and guidance, working with the Ltoa and London boroughs to help produce those plans. And goal 4 is a really important goal about focusing on promoting and getting a better understanding of trees for decision makers, demonstrating the effectiveness of how to implement the London plan with trees, working with the National Tree Safety Group and insurance stakeholders about risk, and working with landowners and statutory undertakers to produce management plans. Want to work on examples of where trees are seen as a real asset rather than a liability when it comes to decision making. So the expanding and growing and expanding has 4 goals as well. And so goal 5, here we're looking at where the potential is for more woodland in London. We have to be realistic about where that could be, but actually the Green Belt may be a great opportunity for this. And I know Ian's going to be talking a little bit about Enfield. And the key principle with all 4 of these goals is about right tree, right place. You may have heard that numerous times, and for the right reason. And we have to make sure that the works that we're trying to undertake and encourage is not detrimental. And so ensuring that there's appropriate planning and consideration about where these trees could go. Goal 6 talks about street trees, and here, London, we have over 700,000 trees already, but that, as we've mentioned already, is varied across the capital. And so this action is looking about how we can encourage sponsorship, corporate activities to support tree planting, working on how we can look about maintaining and supporting authorities and others for putting trees in, and helping decision makers with that process. Goal 7 is looking very similarly. We've moved from the street and now going into the park and the green spaces. And so again, identifying opportunities, supporting those that are managing and considering trees, working with the landowners, the local communities and others, and about identifying and maintaining trees. It's fundamental we put all of this work into trees, that we look after them, and there needs to be a robust system in place to ensure that that happens. Goal 8 is about data, and so we need to understand what we have to help us with the direction of travel. So we're already, one of the parties, Giggle, is already looking at the ancient woodland inventory and doing some updating of the information and going down to a smaller area that can be classed as ancient woodland. We're also looking at, and the Greater London Authority and Giggle are looking at street map data, and also how we agree standards for data collection, so it's easier for us all to be joined up. So the third area is promoting and supporting. And we've got 3 areas within this. So goal 9 is about focusing on promoting. We're looking about undertaking an annual collaborative across the partnership campaign involving Londoners, understanding what we all think about the urban forest and how we could play a part in it, and making it come alive so people can realise and see what opportunities there are for them to be engaged. And that could be whatever level of capacity people have, from watering a tree during the hot weather in the summer, to being a volunteer in a community woodland, a whole range of different activities. And there's something for everyone, and it's helping to promote that. Goal 10 is about supporting woodland enterprise. There's a wide range of opportunities, from food production to growing and producing furniture within the urban forest. And woodlands can support jobs and enterprises, and the actions there about training and sharing knowledge to enable its sustainable activities that are undertaken within the urban forest. And then goal 11 is looking at research topics. We want to understand where the knowledge gaps are in all the thinking that's going on, and more importantly, identify how we fill those gaps. And so it's about collaboration and dissemination of good practice. So they're the main 11 goals. I did say there were 12, and the 12th goal focuses around governance. So we have this plan with 11 goals, and how are we going to try and deliver this? So this is about partnership and working together. So within the urban forest plan, we have a structure. So the foundations of this, or the roots, as we could say, is the partnership network. So that's all of the organisations that are signed up to those objectives for the London Urban Forest Partnership. All the goals have an action lead, and these bring together all the supporting organisations who've identified that they could be involved in that goal together to identify what they could do. And these supporting organisations will have projects and be able to support each other in this process. The goal leads and the action leads then fill into the delivery group, which takes that strategic overview of what's going on and ensuring that all of the goals have a presence and a spotlight on them. Now, funding and resources are fundamental to this plan. And within the partnership, there will be individual organisations that will fund or fund finding for particular activities. this plan will also show what resources are needed to fund the whole plan. And then that can be used for funding bids and discussions that we all have with different funding bodies and decision makers. There's a range of timescales for this programme. All of them have started since the launch in November. And at the current stage, we're in the bringing all the groups together to look at potential activities and options that we have to deliver that goal. And so we're bringing them together and we're identifying activities and the costings of such things so that we can start putting this bid together. Some activities have already happened and are started to happen. As I mentioned, Giggle's already doing some work to enable it to update the ancient woodland inventory. There's been support for collaborative projects such as the Urban Tree Festival that we're in today, and also about starting to collect some of the data that we've talked about. So the big question is, what are we trying to achieve? I say it aims to promote, protect and expand and manage the urban forests. And by identifying these goals, we're hoping it will enable us a suitably resourced urban forest. And so some of the outcomes that we've identified are looking at more trees in our streets, our parks, our green space, our green belt, wherever it is appropriate and right tree, right place. We want to see more woodlands in favourable management. And that depends exactly on the own individual site of what that means and assessing and understanding that. We want to ensure that all ancient woodland is protected and that there's a more strategic local forest plans setting direction and resources across the capital. We also want to ensure that the urban forest is ready for the future. So thinking about climate change, pest and disease now, and acting now to ensure that happens. And we want more engagement with Londoners about the amazing woodland and trees we have around us. Understanding their importance of what we can do to help them now and be ready for the future. This is a live document and it will be reviewed annually by the delivery group, who will monitor progress against those objectives. So I've very quickly run through what the Urban Forest Plan is. I think these links will be appearing in the chat, but it's quite an exciting opportunity that we've got all of these organisations together, identifying where we think we can do the most good. And so, yeah, I will stop sharing there, Nicole, and ask any questions.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Richard. That was a really great overview of the London Urban Forest Plan. I think you covered a lot of ground. There's a lot more detail in there, isn't there, that we can fit in the time that we have. But that's a really good overview. Thank you. We've had a couple of questions in the chat. If I can encourage everybody to put their thoughts and their questions in the chat. Click on the thumbs up if you want to support a question to be asked. I think there's, sorry, in the Q&A, we've had a couple of questions put in the chat, which I'll pick up as well. So the first question is from John Rose. Brilliant to see this plan in place. Really want to see it happen. The simplest measure, as per the London Environment Strategy, is a 10% increase in tree cover. KPI 1, percentage canopy cover in London, will only be measured every 5 years. Should that not be an annual activity, especially given frequency, quality and cost of satellite imagery now available? That's probably one that I could answer, but Richard, do you want to?
Yeah, the reason that we've, it's a good question, and the reason we've sort of gone at the moment at this 5 year is about how long before the impact of the tree is visible in all of that surveying. So depending on what you're planting and where it is, it may take a number of years for it to actually physically appear. So that was the sort of the original thinking behind having 5 years. It gave an opportunity for the trees to be planted, to ensure they're established, and then the canopy is there that can be monitored.
Yeah. Okay. Caroline, sorry, I'm probably going to mispronounce this. Mora. Apologies. So Caroline says, you've got your goal 6 on street trees, especially in low canopy areas, but no sweet pictures of these compared to lots of very lovely wood and forest images. Why not? Oh, and she's suggesting that she's got some great pictures of street trees and took for the Royal College of Arts recently. I love it the way people look at the pictures of these plans in these plans, because they do really make an impression, don't they? And we do consider very carefully what images to include. Do you want to respond to that, Richard?
Yeah, it's very valid. Again, and we've tried to have a range of pictures across all of the different themes that we have. And yeah, we want to tell that story, and sometimes pictures is best. So as I said, this plan is a live document, so we can take that sort of information and try and yeah, make it relevant so everyone can see.
Yeah. I think Caroline wants to, she also said she wants to support street trees, because some people can't, you know, who aren't so able, maybe don't get into parks so much, but the street trees everybody sees, which is a really good point, isn't it? Got another one. Conchita asks, can an established but young native mixed hedge in a garden be given legal protection for the future? This is in Haringey.
That's a good question. In terms of protection, maybe Andy would be able to come in from the local authority, but in terms of the Forestry Act, we do have certain requirements for felling in certain locations, and hedges generally don't fall into that because they're too small. But I would assume things like TPOs and conservation areas, they would have some form of protection on them. And hedges in the urban are absolutely fundamental for things like air quality and particulates. So, but yeah, I couldn't tell you exactly what they've got.
And actually on hedges, if you're interested in hedges, there's a webinar tomorrow as part of the Urban Tree Festival, specifically on urban hedges. So some of the experts in that webinar might well be able to answer that question as well. What else have we got? Sarah Vaughan is saying, can you say something about the loss of mature trees through planning in central London?
Yeah, I mean, planning, and we sort of alluded through that through the document. So there's a whole range of reasons why trees are felled. There are some positive ones and things that you know that are needed for tree felling. And then we have things like planning and other conditions that enable then trees to be felled. And what sort of the aim of this partnership is to ensure that we're giving those decision makers who make those decisions the right information and to enable them to appropriately protect the trees. Now, I know there were changes to the National Planning Framework back in 2018 that increased the protection for ancient woodland and veteran trees. I understand that there's the whole planning going on at the moment. And the key is that we get the message about the importance of trees, about the importance of managing trees. Now, trees may be felled because of health conditions and other things, and that's appropriate management of the trees. And it's a difficult balance that planners have, and we want to try and give them as much information as possible to enable them to make those decisions.
Yeah, good point. And that's encouraging local authorities to have urban forest plans is really key to that, isn't it? Another question, again, apologies if I mispronounce your name, Ginevra Davis is asking, I'm involved with a local area of woodland that is managed by a community group in Upper Norwood. We're hoping to carry out a survey of the trees, but would be grateful for some advice as to how we can carry this out with limited resources. Any tips?
Okay, so there's a whole range of documents out there about. So the first question is what are you trying to find out? What is it? Purely understanding what you've got, or looking at condition and things like that. So sort of understanding what the purpose of the survey's for, and then there's a whole range of different things. If I can capture your details on there, we'll make sure that we send you something, and then you can. We can have a conversation about how we could possibly direct you to what information's there. But there's things like condition assessments that you can undertake that show what have you got, what you should ideally have in terms of a range of ages, looking about the resilience. Have you got just all one species? Is it all ash, for example? Have you got invasive species and other things that might be in there that may be causing harm? And looking at what you've got, and then sort of coming up with some suggested routes to overcome some of the difficulties and realise some of the challenges. So I will try and find that in the chat. My email was on that presentation, so if I don't come to you, then please do. I think it might go in the chat as well. Then do come to me.
Yeah, it'd be great if we can get some emails in the chat. We have a question from Charisse Cruz saying, great to hear that the partnership with corporations are also in the plan. I imagine businesses have a lot of their people who are energized to participate. What are the plans to connect with businesses and organizations? My company have 11,000 people based in London and can get a good amount of people mobilized.
So that's excellent. We want organizations like that are appreciate and understand what we have around us, and the importance it has to them, their staff, their well-being. And so theme 3 about promoting and supporting, goal 9 is the one where we talk about how we're trying to engage in campaigns. So there will be things as time goes on that will show suggested activities and organizations and events that are happening that you can then get involved in. So yeah, watch this space, and yeah, it's great that there are organizations that are thinking like that.
Brilliant. Thank you. And I think there's just one last time for one last question, and someone, Leslie, put a question in the chat rather than the Q&A. So if we deal with that, and then we'll move on to the next speaker. So Leslie's question is, will the plan have any power in respect of new build planning applications? At Stave Hill Ecology Park, TCV, we opposed a tower being built overlooking our hop garden and orchard, plus an area where a red list invertebrate inhabits, which will be killed due to the detrimental change in soil temperature. I'm a ranger and a mentor with the Orchard Project, and was given the Acorn Award in 2019. Fantastic. So this is about the London Urban Forest Plan and planning applications.
Yeah. Afternoon, Leslie. Yeah, had great pleasure in your awards back in 2019, Queen of the Bees, if I remember your T-shirt. So yes. So the plan itself doesn't have any planning status currently. This is about trying to get all the information together to help the decision makers. So it's more about giving those planners all the information that can help them in making the right decisions for that site, and they have to balance a whole range of things. So it doesn't have any sort of planning statutory powers, but it is there to sort of highlight and promote what could be happening on that site.
Great. Okay, brilliant. Well, thanks very much. Thank you very much, Richard. That's really, really great. And we'll do some more questions after the other speakers have been on. So it might be that you'll be able to help out with some of those as well. If anyone has any further questions, do just put them in the Q&A as we go along, and we'll pick them up at the end. I just wanted to say at this point also that I think in the programme it says that we're going to finish at 3, which would be a 2-hour webinar, which we decided was rather long for everybody to concentrate on. So we're going to aim to finish at 2:30. If there's a lot of questions and people are still really engaged, we can carry on a bit longer, but I just wanted to let you know that's what we're aiming to do. So I think it's time to move on to our next speaker, who is Suzanne Simmons from Trees for Cities, one of the partner organisations in the London Urban Forest Plan. And over to you, Suzanne, to tell people what you're going to be talking about. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nicole. I'll just bring up my share screen, if that's okay. Share. Right. Can you all see that?
Yeah, that's great, Suzanne. Thanks.
Okay, great. I'll just run through. Thanks very much, Nicole. Hi, everybody. It's great to get the opportunity to talk to you all about what we are doing as part of the London Urban Forest Plan at Trees for Cities. I suppose what we're doing is taking it one step further from what Richard was describing as an overview. It just feels that the London Urban Forest Plan that we've been involved with now for the last couple of years and are now sitting on the panel has a number of key aims that really tie into the strategic aims of Trees for Cities. So it really feels like a no-brainer to be involved in it. And what I'm looking at really is how we deliver as part of the London Urban Forest Plan. And as you can see, Trees for Cities is involved in depth and breadth throughout. Out of 12 overall goals, we're involved in 8 and leading on 1, as you can see there, which is number 7, which is all about increasing the number of trees in London's parks and green spaces, particularly in areas of low tree canopy cover. This, I don't expect you to be able to read it, but this is our internal working document illustrating how we are delivering as goal lead and then as action lead, and then how we sit on a range of steering groups across the whole of the London Urban Forest Plan. And we're leading on 4 actions, but importantly, it's all about people who can feed in beyond those steering groups and how we can bring in additional expertise and steer into each of these actions. So it's not just all about the names of organisations who are listed in the Urban Forest Plan, it's about us using our connections and bringing in not just experts, but also people from local communities and sort of bringing back and feeding back into the actions as they evolve and develop over the coming years. It's really, for us, a lot of the work that we're delivering is all about Trees for Cities, business as usual. So we would be delivering some of these projects anyway, really, but a lot of them tie in and can be shaped by the London Urban Forest Plan. So we're creating a community hub which ties into a number of actions. We'll talk a little bit more about the Trees for Streets platform, which it fits really neatly into Action 6B. And then we've already completed the first of a number of youth panels that we are aiming to pilot and take beyond London. But the first one of those youth panels to create a number of youth ambassadors has completed, and that will tie into 7D. Looking throughout the whole of the London Urban Forest Plan, we're really keen to share good practice and to deliver and feedback on our own monitoring and evaluation, but also to be involved in the more strategic monitoring and evaluation throughout. And one of the key things is that any of these projects could get a funding boost, in which case it will start to accelerate that action and it will shift it up the list, whereas other actions may take a bit longer and they might actually need some significant scoping that need funding and time and resources. And if it doesn't all come at once, then it will be a slower program. So there has to be some level of flexibility in delivering against these actions. And we're reviewing the actions all the time. Some cases there's overlap, some cases there may be duplication. And so it's making sure that none of these actions are delivered as a sort of independent silos. So it's always good to sort of stop and take check of everything as we're moving through it. So one of the first things that we've worked on has been Action 6B, which we're leading on to promote corporate and public sponsorship for tree planting and maintenance across London. And so there's a number of really good, useful organisations who are helping to steer this forward. And it's a national street tree sponsorship scheme and offers residents an opportunity to identify locations and sponsor a new tree in the neighbourhood. The aim has been to deliver over 250,000 trees in the next 10 years. And what started out from an organisation called Start With Local, who spoke to Trees for Cities, we shaped it up to create a prototype with a number of seed funding sources that set up an initial digital platform. And then with that, the project has been fast-tracked significantly by funding from the Green Recovery Challenge Fund, and it's now an independent standalone charitable organisation that we've just recently completed the employment of 4 new staff, and it's rolling out across London and nationally. And because it's so new, we've got a number of London authorities lined up taking part on it. This is just these are a few illustrations of how you access it. So the platform's up and running. You can access your local authority by typing in your postcode. It will take you through to a map of your area. You can zoom in and you can drop a little pin on the area where you want to plant the tree. That then takes you to a series of gateway questions, and it will then the local authority will then take ownership of this proposal. They'll assess the site, and if they see it is suitable for a tree, they will accept the proposal and build it into their plans. But it immediately becomes ownership of the local authorities. So it's up to them to deliver. But you can offer to water the plant, water the tree when it goes in. It works best if there's an empty tree pit, for instance. And so costs will be dependent on if it's an empty tree pit, if you're going to water it. And it just offers a quick and easy way for local authorities to gauge community desire and need for trees, and also to make them plan for their future tree planting programs in coming seasons. Now, Action 7C is one that doesn't quite have the same upfront seed funding, but it is a significant project, and it's looking at scoping out what land social housing providers have, what the tree canopy cover is in those sites, and looking at planning and bringing the social housing providers and the residents along with tree planting programs based on fact-finding, data, mapping, and so on. And so the key aims that we've set out and established for that is to ensure that social housing providers can prioritise the provision and care for trees, and to raise the awareness of benefits both for the social housing provider, but most importantly, to get the residents involved. And what the aim is to foster collaboration and to offer a shared platform for social housing providers and other organisations to have access to a joined up map of data and locations and landscapes across London. And ultimately, I suppose it's to demonstrably increase tree canopy cover on social housing sites. Now, there will be a much more detailed webinar on this tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. If you really want to dig into that and do a deep dive, I'd advise you to tune into that one. It's coming up shortly, but this is just to give you an overview. So it's initially we're planning it over 5 years, and it's all dependent on getting that initial funding so that we can do the data gathering up maps, tree data, looking at how we can engage and identify the key questions, good practice, what are the barriers, and then to actually get that mapping project up and running. Without funding, we won't be able to take it through the subsequent phases, but the aim would be to identify pilot projects and start rolling them out towards the end of that initial 5-year programme. It is a big ask, but it's a vital area that does need collective, collated information. And then we've got what I would describe this event, which is the Quick Win. Trees for Cities have been working closely with Neil at CPRE London to pull together this year's Urban Tree Festival. And that all falls under the action lead for 9B to develop an annual collaborative campaign for involving Londoners with London's urban forest. I mean, we would love to be able to be outside in the wind and the cold and the sun. We'd love to have, we'd love to be out there getting our hands dirty, but alas, for this year and last year, we've had to do it all online. Online's good, and maybe that will keep going, but hey, it would be great to just have like a proper festival, where we're out enjoying ourselves and sort of interacting under the canopy of trees and planting new ones. So just taking it back a bit from Trees for Cities perspective, the question is asked, why do we need a city-wide forest plan? And Richard's covered a lot of it. But from our perspective, we see that it's all about collaboration and knowledge sharing. And we understand that collectively, all the organisations that are working currently on the plan just have this acquired understanding and history of the landscape and the trees in and around London. They understand and know what works and what doesn't work. And we understand that managing, planning and implementing the urban forest will always be an iterative process, because we know that there's no one option that's going to be the perfect solution. That's just, if you look over the last year of what's happened with a pandemic, we've not been able to rely on our business as usual, working with communities en masse out planting trees. And we've also experienced significant fluctuations and extremes of variable weather patterns in our planting seasons. This time last year, we were sweltering in a prolonged period of very dry weather. Now we're freezing, and it's been like really heavy rainfall. So, no one knows what lies ahead of us. But so it feels that if we have this common aims and it's brought under this really focused action plan, all that knowledge can be harnessed to bring together all that good practice that we know. We can start to identify those challenges and the barriers that we're facing in achieving a really good, healthy urban forest. And it gives us opportunities to feed back and evaluate, to pause and think. And, with everybody working together, both teams that are working on the London Urban Forest, but also beyond that, it brings, collective pressure for funding and resources. It's a voice for good. Any potential funders will be able to see and understand, that these, that we know what we're talking about, and will hopefully support and bring the London Urban Forest Plan forward. I think these are things that can't be done on our own. And so what role do our partners play? Well, partners for us are more than just funders and other not-for-profit organisations and local authorities. They very much relate to our volunteers and our communities. Without those, our business won't function as well as it would do with them. So we know things get done when you partner up and you collaborate with people. You just get more force behind you, and you can demonstrate an effective process through these shared goals. The other thing is that it is cost effective, and bluntly it might be, but it is free labour. And somebody mentioned in the questions earlier about corporates. They actually will come to us and they will pay us to plant trees. They will provide the trees that they will plant, and they will help maintain as well, so we can bring them into the full maintenance programme as well. And we all know that people want to plant trees. I think having volunteers to plant trees has not been a problem for us in the past. And I think after being cooked up for the last 16, 18 months or whatever, people are desperate to get out this season, hopefully to plant more. And then there's that whole thing about developing ownership of local spaces, getting feedback on ideas and getting people to help select trees to plant them in the right places. And what you get then is this kind of neighbourly activism, people joining together across all ages and backgrounds. And what you do, it feels that you get this long-term buy-in. People are living there, they can watch, they can see how their trees are growing and developing and evolving over time. And then importantly for us, developing long-term plans with local authorities is a really useful thing through strategic partnerships, because even with a small upfront investment, and we know that resources are very tight, we can bring greater income through use of volunteers, through bringing other funding to actually meet some of their objectives in trying to get the London Urban Forest functioning and healthy. And just a final thing I put on here is that ourselves, and I'm sure many of the other organisations involved, because we're independent of local authorities, and local authorities do sometimes have difficulty getting across to their communities. They're seen in some areas, not always obviously, with a little bit of distrust. But what we can do is act as that intermediate and as that independent organisation through which these events can happen and through which the tree planting programmes can be delivered. Last slide is that one day soon, we are absolutely yearning to get out, and hopefully some of you will be able to join us, ideally this coming planting season, to get out there and join in festivals and events, planting trees and getting our hands dirty and getting stuck in. I'm going to stop my share there, but other questions I think will come later. Back to you, Nicole. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. That was really great talk. And what we're going to do is move on to the next speaker and save questions till the end. So we've got a couple more speakers, and then if you can keep on putting your questions in the Q&A function and boosting questions you like with the thumbs up. We'll deal with them all at the end, so I'm sure you'll have lots of questions for Suzanne. Thanks for that, Suzanne. And so on to the next one, Ian. This is
Hi, everyone.
Ian from Enfield Council, who's going to talk about some of the work Enfield have been doing to increase tree cover. Thank you, Ian.
Great, I'm just going to start sharing my presentation. To bear with me one sec. Hopefully you can all see that okay. So as Nicole mentioned, I'm Ian Russell. I'm a principal engineer at Enfield Council. And I'm going to talk about the woodland creation plans that we've got, and also what we're doing and why we're doing it. So first of all, I suppose I should explain where Enfield is in case you don't know. It's actually the northernmost borough in London. So it's right up near the M25. And quite a big portion of the borough is greenbelt land. So all this, hopefully you can see my cursor, basically this kind of northwest kind of quadrant of the borough is all designated as greenbelt. A lot of that is farmland. Now, I'm a hydrologist, so I'm going to start off talking about flood risk management, which is one of the key drivers for delivering this woodland project. So we started off a few years, I mean, basically, in Enfield, we've got 3 rivers that run across the borough. One is Turkey Brook, and then you've got Salmons Brook, and you've got Pims Brook up here. And they all flow over into the River Lee, which carries on down through Hackney on towards the Olympic Park. These rivers are great natural assets, but unfortunately they also bring quite a lot of flood risk with them. So these yellow and blue areas are the areas that we'd expect to see flooding for an extreme rainfall event. As you can see from this map, a lot of the flow is kind of coming from that kind of northwest of the borough, the upland areas, which, as I said, is greenbelt. So this got us thinking about opportunities to implement natural flood management a few years ago. So natural flood management is things like restoring rivers, reconnecting floodplains, creating wetlands, which are great at storing floodwater, but also a key one is woodland creation. And woodland is fantastic for reducing flood risk because obviously, I mean, these trees are the ones we planted just in the last few months. So at the moment, they're all tiny little things enshrouded in plastic tubes, unfortunately. That's just to make sure they can survive the first few years of their lives. But in time, as they grow and mature, they have a big impact on the amount of rainfall runoff that's generated. So trees, first of all, they intercept a small amount of rainfall by their leaves and branches, but also the roots help to increase the amount of infiltration, so the amount of water that goes down into the ground. And also they kind of roughen up the surface, so you get the flow that carries along the surface is slowed down. So we've been doing some hydraulic modelling, working with consultants, working with the Environment Agency, looking at the impacts on flood risk. And I've just got a smaller version of that plan again. So this area up here is the area where we're looking to create woodland. And basically the area down here where most of the flood risk is, we potentially can have a significant impact on reducing that by doing it. So the other thing I was going to mention about this project is that there's also a very significant heritage angle to it, because this area historically was part of Enfield Chase, which was a sort of royal hunting forest. I think it's first mentioned in the Domesday Book almost 1,000 years ago. This map is from around 1786, which you can see at that time there was still quite a substantial amount of woodland in the area, although it was quite fragmented even then. This is a slightly older map from 1700, which shows even more trees in place. And actually what we've been able to do here is overlay it onto a modern day map. And then this final map shows the outline of Enfield Chase as it was in the year 1700 on that modern day map of Enfield. And you can see there's quite a strong correlation between the area that's still greenbelt and the kind of extent of Enfield Chase as it was a few hundred years ago. And what I should also explain is that these colours represent what the different land uses are at the moment. So the areas that are coloured are areas that are owned by Enfield Council. The slightly darker green are golf courses. The light green is existing parks and open spaces. And then the kind of yellowy brown colour is land that's currently leased out to tenant farmers. And that's the area where we've got potential to restore some of that landscape and achieve, by planting trees and achieve some of those flood risk management benefits I mentioned earlier. This is what a lot of that land looks like for much of the year at the moment. So you can see some lovely, I mean, there are fragments of ancient woodland within this space, and you can see some loveliness of woodland and trees in the background, but unfortunately, most of it is arable farmland. Historically, it wasn't used as arable. Historically, a lot of the farms will tell us, and archaeological information tells us that this was And prior to World War II, most of this land was pasture land, or a mixture of wood pasture, and that's the sort of thing that we're looking to reinstate, or we're currently carrying out a feasibility study to see how we could reinstate some of that kind of more natural historical landscape. So this is what farmland may have looked like 100 years ago. This photo was actually taken last year in Epping Forest, not too far away from Enfield, only a few miles away. So Epping Forest, they've reintroduced wood pasture a few years ago, and so what they've got is kind of free grazing cattle. And really, wood pasture is quite not a vague term, but it's quite a wide-ranging term, which goes everywhere from fairly open grassland with just a few trees dotted around to scrubland and on towards kind of closed canopy woodland. So what we're looking to do in Enfield is basically create more woodland, and not to eliminate farming completely, but to try and strike a better balance between farming and other types of land use. So, working with the Mayor of London and Forestry Commission, we've come up with this plan to start to restore the Enfield Chase woodland. So this gives you a bit of an idea about what we're talking about. We've got a couple of big existing parks. Trent Park is one over here. Another one is Forty Hall over here. And in between, you've got this dashed red line, which is the London Loop. So one of the key things we want to achieve with this woodland creation is to create more publicly accessible green space. So we kind of focused our initial tree planting efforts on creating a swathe of woodland that roughly kind of follows this dotted red line. It also follows the Samsbrook River, which is a key element as well, because as I mentioned, Samsbrook is one of the main rivers where there's significant flood risk downstream. So this area that's highlighted in yellow covers an area of about 60 hectares, and we're going to be planting that up over 2 years. So actually last year was the first year. We planted about 50,000 trees. We're working in partnership with Thames 21, and we're aiming to plant another 50,000 into coming winter. And one of the other important things, which Richard mentioned was one of the goals of the London Urban Forest Plan, is to try and involve the community in this as much as possible. So we did have ambitious plans to get every single one of these trees planted by volunteers from the local community. Unfortunately, COVID put paid to that. We did get a few in with volunteers before lockdown in November, but actually most of those trees planted last winter were done by contractors. But we're hoping that this coming winter we will be able to involve a lot more volunteers instead. And I've also just knocked in the different bits of funding we got from different organisations there, just to show kind of where the actual financing is coming from that's supporting this project. You might be thinking, oh, Enfield Council haven't contributed very much, but I should also mention Enfield contributed all the land as well, which is no small contribution. That National Lottery Heritage Fund amount down the bottom there is actually through the Green Recovery Challenge Fund. So that, although that actually isn't going towards the woodland creation itself, that's going towards other landscape management measures, but it's also going towards carrying out more community engagement and also offering residents of the borough and potentially elsewhere nature prescribing. So this is really something that's specifically aimed at members of the community who've got particular health needs, who could benefit from spending more time in nature and working with other volunteers and activities of those kinds. So this is just some images of what the kind of landscape looks like today, what it might look like in a few decades if we plant more trees and with more grassland and scrubland coming in, because as I mentioned, this is in a way that the woodland creation element is part of a wider opportunity to rewild some of this landscape. And the rewilding element really is about, as I mentioned before, restoring some of those natural processes. So you've got, these are just some of the sort of rewilding aspirations. I've also mentioned there some of the London Plan policies, but I won't dwell on this slide too long, but it's just kind of demonstrating how rewilding can link with some of the kind of sustainable measures that we're looking to implement across London. And then here I've got just a huge list of all the different benefits that can be associated with rewilding, including some of the things I've already mentioned, like biodiversity and heritage and reducing flood risk. But in particular, I want to focus on public health and also carbon sequestration. So I mentioned at the start of the talk that one of the early drivers for this project was about flood risk management, but actually in a way flood risk now is being not superseded, but kind of overtaken by some of these other big drivers like carbon. So Enfield published its climate action plan last year. The council is looking to become carbon neutral by the year 2030. So planting these trees has become a key element of that plan. On the public health side, that links to Enfield's blue-green strategy, which was consulted on in November. Well, the consultation has only just recently finished, but the consultation started in November last year, and we're expecting that strategy to be published hopefully within the next month or two. But some of these are some of the key aims of that. So quite a lot of these link in with our efforts to kind of create more natural spaces, plant more trees and so on, recognising that Enfield's population is growing. It has grown substantially over the last 20 years and it's expected to continue growing over the next 20 years. This next map is lifted straight out of our strategy, and really what we're trying to show here is how we can link these kind of nature spaces together with, you know, the places that people live. So over in this northwest of the borough, you've got the London Loop, and you can see the green areas of the farmland there, where we're hoping to plant more and more trees over the next few years. But actually, you know, that's not necessarily where most people live. The densest parts of Enfield are further in the south and in the middle of the borough. So part of our blue and green strategy is to improve infrastructure, so to ensure that all of Enfield residents and people who live beyond Enfield as well can access these new spaces easily. So we're looking to implement more cycle paths, more footpaths, create better links to local transports, you know, railway stations and bus stops and so on. But that is quite a wide programme of activities really that are going to be taking place over the next, I don't know, 10 years at least. But at the end of the game really is to go from something a bit like this to something that looks a bit more like this. So more wildlife, more people, more trees. Hopefully we'll get there. Right, that's the end of my presentation. I'll stop sharing.
Great, thank you, Ian. That was, given the scale of what you're doing, that was an amazingly quick and efficient kind of overview of it. Do put all your questions for Ian in the Q&A. There's a lot. I know there's a lot more detail behind that project. Lots and lots. But what's really fantastic, I think, about that example is how it shows that a sort of strategic approach, particularly to boroughs that have a lot of green belt, can really create a sort of big step change really in the quality. And I think it's a really great exemplar, or is becoming one, in terms of improving access to green space, which is so important, as we know, after the pandemic, and improving the quality, biodiversity, and the sort of ecological richness and recreation value of the green belt. So thanks for that. We're going to move on to the next speaker now, which is our last speaker, and then we'll do the questions and answers after that. So next up is Andy Tipping, who is the chair of the London Tree Officers Association. So over to you, Andy.
Thank you. Great presentation, Ian. I started my ARB career in Forty Hall in 1987, so I know Enfield very well, and that's where it all started for me. I'm just going to talk briefly and quickly about the LTOA's involvement in the London Urban Forest Plan. We are leading on a number of goals and are supporting organisation on a number of others. And I think to go through and detail our involvement in all of this would take up far more time than I've been allocated. So I was going to talk about a couple of things really. I've been going through the document, and let's see if I can get it up. Yeah, we're leading on goal 1, which is to manage London urban forests according to a set of principles, ensuring improved resilience against pest disease and climate change. So I think within here, what we've tried to do and what we can do as local authorities is embed biosecurity into our policies and also into our contracts and potentially into any planning permissions that's given for development for mitigation planting, so that we can ensure that trees are planted that are grown in the UK or have spent a number of a specified time at the nursery, to ensure that we're not importing any nasty diseases. I think the forestry sector has learnt a lot from the introduction of ash dieback through saplings for forestry. But in the advanced nursery stock sector, that we're still importing an awful lot of plants. The potential for xylella to come in is terrifying, to be quite honest. There is a new organisation called Plant Healthy that I only learned about recently. But one of the things that they say within there is that in the European Red List of trees indicated 42% of European trees are considered having a high risk of extinction, with the primary threat being from invasive species. The only way really that this can be averted, I think, is maybe through legislation. I think there's a lot of asking that things like garden centres, and I saw a sort of semi-mature olive trees for sale, I think being cured, a couple of weeks ago. They've been imported, they've been grown and imported straight in from Europe, and xylella is decimating the olive population in places like Italy and I think Greece. So the advanced nursery stock sector still needs an awful lot of work. So there's that. But all of this, like I said, we can do through policy, and there's a range of policies that are hoping to be developed, and this is in goal 3, to have local urban forest plans. And it's great to see Enfield are just about to adopt one next year. Barnet's got a green infrastructure policy and a tree policy. And what I would say is that policy is the most important thing, certainly for a local authority to have. We only published ours in 2017. I've been at Barnet for it'll be 25 years in July. The last 4 years have just been great because we can refer everyone to what we do, why we do it, what our strategic tree planting program that's funded via the policy. So policy is so important. And I've been asked to talk specifically, and one of the things that I'm leading on personally is about risk. So I've got a very short presentation to give you, which is about tree risk management. I think that our job as tree officers primarily is to ensure that our trees do not cause harm. That's the reason that we're employed, and everything else seems to be secondary. I think tree planting and management is becoming more and more, there's more emphasis placed on it, and quite right, but it is a byproduct of what we do, I think. Now, having said that though, I do think that the removal of trees without replanting is a public health issue. If you can see the image here, this is taken in Australia, not in Britain, but the principles remain, where you've got a highway here that is 61 degrees Celsius and 34 degree underneath tree cover. If we're removing trees, we're exposing people to more of the urban heat island, more direct sunlight. So I think that it is a risk. Oh, someone's saying you can't see my presentation.
Yeah, were you meaning to share, Andy? Because we
sorry,
just see you, not your presentation.
Oh, you can't. Oh, God!
We love looking at your lovely.
I'm talking to myself.
Coming now, fantastic.
Is that there?
Yep, that's good.
Okay, right. Good on. Right, so you can see here this thermal image photograph of this is Australian, like I said. I think it's Melbourne. So you've got the carriageway here exposed to direct sunlight at 61 degrees and in shade 34 degrees. So I think that that tree planting the removal of trees without proper replacement is a public health issue. This is a map of nitrogen dioxide, NO2, and this is Barnet. This is the borough that I manage trees in. And as you can see, as you'd expect, it's the North Circular Road, the A1, the A5 that's got the worst concentrations of NO2. And we're trying to plant trees for both of those reasons, to reduce the urban heat island temperatures, but also to disperse and deposition of pollutants as well. And we're focusing, as you'd expect, in the south and the west of the borough, where these bright colours, these oranges and reds, appear. So tree risk. There's two particular areas of risk associated with trees, and the first one is the obvious one, which is personal injury, which is trees coming down hurting people. So this is a picture that was taken a long time ago, fortunately, of a willow tree overhanging the northern line in Hendon Park, which we came along and cut down rather quickly because it was stone dead and it was overhanging the northern line. I think if you interrupt the network, the fines are shockingly massive, as you'd expect. If it seems to be that your negligence has caused the underground network to shut down. But the main thing is obviously the risk to people. If that tree fell over onto that tube train, it could have been significant. The picture to the right, there was no one in this car. It was a parked car, but you can see the damage that happened. So the way that you manage this risk is to employ a group of specialists, arboriculturists, tree officers, to go out and systematically inspect your trees. The advice is in the National Tree Safety Group. Really, there's a scenario that's actually modelled on Barnet, because I'm part of the drafting party for that document. And we really expect people to employ specialists and in-house teams, because if you're looking for trees for safety for these reasons, then it's only part of the job. So the other part of the job will be looking to where you can plant. The other part of the job will be pruning young trees to make sure they progress into mature trees. And the other thing you can do at the same time is to spot stack companies when they come along and do this. I think they've gotten better, but it depends which contractor is being employed. But this is a young hornbeam, I think it is, and it just got decimated by this installation that was going on here. And that will lead potentially, if that tree gets mature and it's got half of its root system missing, that will lead to something like this, which we don't want to see. I think that tree failure is inevitable. It will happen, regardless of your attention and the amount of work that you put into to go around inspecting trees. You have to employ specialists, because what they'll do, tree officers will understand the interaction between trees and fungus, which causes trees to die, the significance of those diseases. The host tree, is it an oak or is it a poplar? Each will cope with diseases differently, and the risk that they do pose. Unfortunately, it doesn't happen very often. But the reason, I think is we have a dedicated group of professionals to go out there, identify this before this happens, and I think that keeps the levels of failure down. The second area of risk that we manage is building subsidence. So a lot of London is built on clay, which is a shrinkable soil. The foundations that sit beneath buildings can desiccate in times of drought, and 2018 was a quite a nasty year. We saw a lot of subsidence in the years that went by, but we are dealing, unfortunately, with the insurers who underwrite these buildings will ask for trees to be felled unnecessarily, and we have tried to improve the situation through negotiation and discussion with the loss adjusters and insurance groups, but a lot of the time it reverts to type, and every tree is asked to be felled. This building here has got a significant crack. I mean, this is quite an extraordinary subsidence case here. And there was a big willow tree next to the house. Now, I know you see behind that pampas grass, there's a group of oaks that are like 35, 40 metres away from this property. But we were asked to fell all the oak trees. Now, we refused because they did not cause the damage to this building. But if we'd have complied, those trees would no longer be there. So you have to have a strategy in place, really, to manage this. The LTLA have got a risk management strategy for tree root claims, and we're just about to, hopefully, we will publish that this year. But we're also working with the insurance industry in a group called the Joint Mitigation Protocol, which started off as being a very, very testy group with people. It was like a Mexican standoff for the first year of negotiations. But eventually we kind of saw each other's point of view. But like I say, it's a tricky one, because as far as they're concerned, they don't want to pay for the repair to that building, because it can be ridiculously expensive. Have to move the people out, underpin, or even demolish. I think this one is a demolition. I think the building's gone, actually. But one of the ways we do it is to incorporate our trees into a rolling program of pruning. Now, because we understand the risk and we do have professionals employed to manage this, this is seen as being foreseeable. So we get our trees, and these are London Plains in North Finchley, that is on clay. And these trees were pollarded before I joined Barnet, so this has been going on since the 60s, really. And Subsidence became an insured peril in 1973, I think it was, and since then is an industry amongst itself. So we have to keep these trees under a strict regime of pruning, because if a crack happens in that building, really, we haven't got a defence. So it has to happen, because otherwise we will lose our high forest trees that we have as street trees. So again, that's why we need a good group of tree officers that can understand this risk, get contracts in place, so and the budget in order to manage these trees such as this. So going back, there's a wide range of policies that are proposed, I think, for the London Urban Forest Plan, which will, I think, make everybody's job more transparent and easier, allow the public to understand why we do what we do, because a lot of, going back to that previous slide, this is these trees in leaf. In winter, we take everything off of them. We get lots of criticism for doing jobs like that. But, if people understand the reason why we prune them, we're going to have to fell them. So once you have policies in place, then people can understand why you're doing what you're doing. These are just a few of them. So that is the National Tree Safety Group document. That gives us a background about the actual risk that trees pose. That's the other thing as well, is our legal position. I think we have to understand that we have to work within the law, whether it's statute, common. There have been very few actual criminal prosecutions for fatalities caused by falling trees, but there's been an awful lot of court cases in the civil court. So each one of those creates a precedent that we then have to consider with regard to our tree management. So actually, that's the end of my little presentation. I can stop the share there. Tree planting, I mean, Suzanne's thing was really good. I really like that, because I've just been asked by our public engagement people at Barnet to create a map where people can drop a pin in where they want trees planted. So I just sent her a link to the website that you gave us, and I think hopefully we'll be doing that. I think more public engagement with regard to street trees is really important. We get hundreds of requests for tree planting a year outside people's properties, and they become kind of VIP requests, if you like. We'll try and fulfill them before anything else, because if people want trees outside their houses, they're more likely to water them. Some people put little bits of flowers in there, and they make sure that they're watered, so the trees benefit from that. When I was at college, I think I was told you should never allow people to put flowers in tree pits, but personally, I think it's a good thing. So yeah, public engagement is so important, and this is one of the reasons why I really like this festival, to be quite honest, because we're used to talking to our peers and other professionals, but when I've been on this before, half the audience is the general public and not specialists, and I think that brings so much more to the table about why we do it, and we can get focused that way ourselves in a lot by suggestions from residents. And I like the fact this is not a hugely professional. This isn't just for professionals and by professionals, but we're engaging with the public a lot more. Okay, I think that's the end of my time.
Thank you, Andy. That's yeah, I think we've had everything, haven't we, between the speakers, from the sort of large scale strategic plans and projects down to the nitty gritty of managing trees in amongst where people live, and all the challenges associated with that. So yeah, and apologies, I should have flagged up that your presentation wasn't showing sooner. I hadn't realised I had one. I thought at the beginning you said, "Oh, I'm just going to talk." Anyway, I don't think we missed too much. So yeah, apologies for that. We've had a few questions in the chat. I think probably if everybody, all the speakers could unmute themselves, unless you've got a lot of noise going on in the background, because there's a mixture of questions for sort of a number of different speakers. So the first one from Caroline is, I think, related to Suzanne's talk about this Urban Tree Festival, and saying maybe don't move all the festival outside. She says, I'm disabled and this is so much more accessible. So it's more of a comment than a question, but it's a really good point.
I acknowledge that, absolutely. I mean, there's been a lot of benefit through having online events. It's reached a much wider audience. I'm all behind, keeping a great online program. And ideally, if we can make our events as accessible as possible to encourage as wide a range of people to come, we will definitely try to do that. So all the more pressure on anyone that's organising an event to make it as accessible and, to have things prepared for people who need support in attending events. Just being there is just a nice thing, and so yeah, everyone's welcome as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, I think the great thing about the world going online is that we can all get so much more involved in all sorts of things, really. It's been a bit of an eye-opener, hasn't it? But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't make physical events in person accessible as well. So the next question is from Roger Chapman. So this is relating to Ian's point about the tree guards, the plastic tubes. And Roger says, how did young trees manage to survive before the advent of plastic tubes? Do we really need this plastic waste? And I know Richard might have something to say on this as well, but Ian, do you want to start off?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of interesting information out there about the way that trees grew. I mean, actually, there's a lot of areas in Enfield where, because of austerity and other reasons, we've stopped managing some of our parks in the way that we used to manage them, i.e. we've reduced the frequency of mowing. And there's, sorry, I've got a thunderstorm going on here in case I'll keep an eye on the rainfall. Anyway, sorry, yeah, so we're actually seeing lots of places in Enfield that were grasslands that are now naturally regenerating woodland without any plastic tubes. And, this is obviously something that's, always happened. I mean, what the key concern really is about deer, and other animals as well, but basically nibbling. And we've done this, we planted some trees a couple of years ago as part of the forerunner to this wider tree planting project. We did a hectare here, a hectare there, and we thought, well, actually, there's not that many deer in London. You've got the M25. It's not like there's loads and loads of deer. Maybe we'll get away with it. But actually, we did see a huge amount of nibbling and trees being damaged. So, and the trees where we have seen natural regeneration, some of you can see the signs of nibbling on those trees as well. And they've ended up being kind of bushier, wider, kind of more, almost like they've been copied at a very early age sort of thing. And in some ways, that might lead to more interesting trees. However, when we're investing a lot of money and effort in this kind of woodland creation project, we want to make sure that, we want to try and make sure that every single one of those trees has got the best chance of surviving. So there's also a lot of discussion about things like, the role that other plants might play, like brambles and so on. Some people say those kind of thorny, kind of scrubby type habitats might create a good habitat. Things like oaks can kind of start appearing through the middle. But again, and something you could argue that maybe some element of that is kind of more sustainable in the long term, and it might lead to a more slightly diverse woodland and so on. But on the other hand, if you want to get in there, get your trees growing and get them to be as healthy as possible, you're better off kind of giving. I'll pass on to Richard now, but hopefully he agrees with what I'm saying.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, totally agree, Ian. I mean, there's two main reasons for putting tree shelters on a tree. One, as Ian has said, is about deer or browsing that's going to affect the tree. And we know that the deer population has increased dramatically over the years compared to previous. And the second one is that there is actually a benefit in terms of the speed of establishment of the tree, that it's in a tube, because it's like a little mini greenhouse. So that's sort of been the way. So Enfield has got a combination of both. There are areas that are with tree shelters, and then there are areas that are inside deer fences. And that's due to the scale, the shapes. There's a section down by Salmon's Brook that if we fenced it, you'd be walking down this sort of tunnel of a 6-foot fence on both sides type thing. So it's working out what's best for that site and what that site needs. So I'll put in the chat in a minute, but there has been some new guidance put out about tree shelters and just things to consider, that what you can do, what you think about. And there's also at the moment some really interesting prototypes of non-plastic tubes that are out there, and that they're being tested in a whole range of situations. And The weather we've had recently could be quite interesting for the ones made from paper, and those sorts of things. So there's a whole range going on. The key is you need to know your site. Does it need the protection? And then also, what are you going to do with those tubes? You know, it's nothing worse than they've done their job, they sort of break, and then they're just sort of left in the wood. It's about removing, recycling them, and starting again. So they do have a part to play, particularly where mammal damage and other things will cause the trees not to grow. And at the end of the day, we want trees establishing and providing all of those benefits. It's a site-by-site decision on what you put on there.
Yeah, could I just add, we probably, having most of our work in the inner London boroughs, we don't use, in London we don't use plastic tree guards, and tends, fingers crossed, to be okay, but that's that whole thing about the unpredictability of planting young woodlands. One of the things, though, Richard, you touched on was about sort of the little microclimate that you create around the tree. We found that by, instead of sort of spreading the mulch across the site, we're stacking the mulch around the base of the newly planted trees to create that warmth that holds the water, just to try and give the trees a bit more of a kickstart. And because we don't necessarily find deer damage, although that could happen, that seems to have been working so far this year in a wetter, cooler spring than it did last year. So quite a lot of things. These sort of lot to learn really from talking to each other.
Great, thank you for that. I've just been warned that the webinar might finish abruptly at 2:30. If it does, apologies in advance, but we've got lots of questions, so let's see if we can get through a few more. Leslie has asked, will forest gardens and Miyawaki forests be included to increase tree canopy cover? I'm not sure who's best placed to answer that. Has anyone got any views on Miyawaki forest, tiny forest?
Yeah, we're about to do 2, I think, this year. Our environment committee passed that we're going to do those. So I'm actually meeting tomorrow with. Oh no, we had a meeting last week with Earthwatch, and it's definitely a citizen-led project. I think that canopy cover, yes, but I mean it goes against all the principles of forestry or woodland creation, the density of planting. So it's an interesting project to get involved in, because I was just like, this isn't going to work. They're just going to grow up really tall and thin and fall over, which I think is kind of what's going to happen. But you will still increase your canopy for the ones that do survive. I
think there's also the whole issue about biodiversity as well. So if you get those kind of quite intense little mini kind of ecosystem.
I'm looking forward to it. At the beginning, I didn't like it, but I you know, I'm actually quite looking forward to it now. I mean,
we've planted our forests traditionally quite tightly spaced historically, but yeah, I mean, I'm all for seeing how these things operate, especially in urban situations where land is tight, and maybe, you know, it's nice to give a few of them a try. I think there is a bit of a track record there that sort of underpins the principles behind it. And yeah, why not give it a go, see if it works, refine it. It's that whole thing about iterative learning. If we don't try these things in this country, in this climate, you know, we're not going to know if they work. And, you know, we've got to give it a bash.
Because if we do get cut off in a minute, there is one thing here that from John Rose. Do you mind, Nicole, if I try and answer that quickly?
Yeah, go ahead.
It's about managing tree risks. And he says, tree risk is obviously an important task requiring professional oversight. Yet as a society, we tend to become more risk averse over time. Do you think this is reflecting local authority policies? Are we removing or heavily pruning trees that we would left? John, I think the opposite is true. Personally, that we are becoming less risk averse, and I think that's happened over time with things like the Ancient Tree Forum stuff and definitely the publication of the National Tree Safety Guidance, because very few people get killed by trees. The only way where it is increasing is in ash dieback removal, and there's been some. I think that's a flawed approach to fell every tree that you've got that's dying back with that. But some people are doing it, and then some are then developing on land where the ash trees used to be. So there might be an agenda there that's not particularly open. But I think we're less risk averse personally. I think when I first, when I went to college, I was told that you fell every tree that you see with a fungus on it. And when I first joined Barnet, I was pretty much told the opposite is true, and we have a group of trees that are diseased, heavily diseased, but they're managed well, and they're not falling over. And like I said earlier, if you do have specialists who understand the different diseases and the different hosts and the significance of those, you can manage your trees without having to remove them. But sometimes you do. Obviously, it's a natural thing. The dying ornamentals that we have, that's our biggest thing. Purple plum trees, hawthorns that were planted in the 60s are all dying now. So yes, there we will replace.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Well, I think we're pretty much out of time now. So yeah, so thanks everybody for posting your questions. Sorry we couldn't get through them all. Thank you so much to the speakers. I think it's been a really interesting session, and I think we could easily go on for another hour chatting about all the issues or longer. Just to let participants know that this webinar has been recorded, so it'll be available online if you want to look back at any of it again, and that there's a whole load of fantastic events over the week. So do have a look at the programme and sign up to the other Urban Tree Festival events, particularly the webinars tomorrow on trees and social housing estates and urban hedges. There's also a really good one on Thursday, chaired by a colleague, Ruth Knight, about trees and climate change, plus a whole host of other topics during the week. I can't remember them all. So have a look at the programme, the link's in the chat. So yeah, just leaves me to say thank you very much to all our speakers, and we'll see you soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.